Very well. So today's webinar is about doing research and not development and getting your research focused. And as a general learning outcome, it is hoped that there will be afterwards a better understanding about the quite apparent, but apparently often mistaken, research and development dimensions that can exist in doctoral level research. And more specifically, how research and development are different. And why research without development can earn you a doctoral degree, while vice versa, this can prove to be challenging. And we will be looking into this. And more generally, the R&D relation from a doctoral study perspective, which is perhaps slightly different than from an industrial R&D perspective. And in the fourth part, we will looking on how you could be working from research to thesis. And in closing, we will have a group activity where we have the chance to reflect on your research and to evaluate to what extent it is geared at either research or development, or perhaps at both. Now, let's look into this. How are research and development different? Now, from the OECD, let me mute everyone. From the OECD, I found this nice explanation. Research and experimental development comprises creative work undertaken on a systematic basis in order to increase the stock of human knowledge and to devise new applications based upon it. The term R&D covers three activities. The first is basic research. The second is applied research. And the third is experimental development. So basic research is experimental or theoretical work undertaken primarily to acquire new knowledge of the underlying foundation of phenomena and observable facts, but without any particular application or use in view. Contrary to that, applied research is also original investigation undertaken in order to acquire new knowledge. It is, however, directed primarily towards a specific practical aim or objective. And there it comes in the link. Experimental development is systematic work drawing on existing knowledge gained from research, but alternatively also could be practical experience, which is directed to producing new materials, products, or devices, to installing new processes, systems, and services, or to improving substantially those already produced or installed. Now, let's dissect that a bit. Basic research, therefore, is experimental or theoretical work undertaken primarily to acquire new knowledge, but without any particular application or use in view. And this is contrasting and making it different to applied research, which is still an original investigation undertaken in order to acquire new knowledge. So there it's very similar to basic research, but directed primarily towards specific practical aim or objective. Now, while basic research and applied research are in so far quite similar, experimental development, on the other hand, is a systematic work drawing on such earlier existing knowledge that was gained from research or also practical experience, and which is directed to producing new things, stuff, or to improve substantially already produced and installed things. Now, so far, so good. So this is to say experimental development is systematic work that's drawing on existing knowledge, a knowledge that is produced either through basic or applied research or prior experience. But if it's produced through earlier knowledge, then it must be created, that knowledge, before the research can be taking place, before the development can be taking place. So it's implying that basic or applied research will be followed by experimental development. Now, unfortunately, while this is quite simple, if you ask Google or any other search engine, things stop being that simple. Here, this is the first result that you will get from Google. And this says and tells me that applied research creates practical solutions. So this sounds like the research directly creating solutions. And that applied research is solution-driven, while basic research is knowledge-specific. So then it is only basic research that is looking at research problems, I could ask from a doctoral researcher perspective, while applied research is creating solutions. Well, this is starting to confuse me here a bit, because it puts basic research and applied research at very different levels, while in the earlier definition we have seen it was supposed to both create new knowledge. So let's look into the difference between applied research and development, or perhaps see if applied research really creates practical solutions. Now, let's take a very practical example. I found this one here very good. Applied research is designed to solve practical problems. So it's to solve problems of the modern world rather than to acquire knowledge for knowledge's sake. One might say that the goal of the applied scientist is to improve, so solution-driven, the human condition. For example, applied researchers may investigate ways to improve agricultural crop production, treat or cure a specific disease, improve the energy efficiency of homes, offices, or modes of transportation. So those are all indeed geared towards a solution. Some scientists feel that the time has come for a shift in emphasis away from purely basic research and towards applied science. Now here you see two different words, basic research compared to applied science. So we don't talk here about applied research apparently, but a broader term, science. This trend, they feel, is necessitated by the problems resulting from global overpopulation, pollution, and the overuse of the Earth's natural resources. Now, what is here named to be a problem are, as a matter of fact, rather larger issues. And we will look into this. Because if you are looking exactly what would be the relating research questions that typically would be derived from what was provided as example to be tackled, you will see that for improving agricultural crop production, a corresponding and relating research question would be, what are the issues that limit agricultural crop production? So it goes exactly one step back. Likewise, treat or cure a specific disease, the corresponding research questions would be, what are the limitations in the current disease treatment practices? And equally, for improve the energy efficiency of homes, offices, or modes of transportation, the corresponding research question would be, what are the current energy inefficiencies of homes, offices, or modes of transportation? So basically, while what is put to be forward as the big things, they are more objectives and aims for experimental development without specifically naming what will be done. And the reason for this is that the answers to these questions, to the research questions, will exactly tell us on how we can improve agricultural crop production. What are the issues that limit us at current? So there's a clear distinction in between research and development. And no, the research question is not how to improve agricultural crop production, right? Those are not the research questions. It's not solution focused, but we need still to understand what are the problems that limit us in the production. So if you work over any of the guides that you are provided with most of the search engines, as we have been, let me flip back. As we have seen here, they might be framed in a way that they potentially misguide you as a research novice, because you are reading things very different and you take out the wrong ends of the storyline. And we will look into this further. Now, the Rng timeline illustrated would be rather like this. Your doctoral research project typically would at least be starting in between T0 and T1, where you are carrying out basic or applied research and explore a research problem. And based upon that knowledge, then you could engage in experimental development. Now, it could be argued that, of course, if there's practical experience, you do not need to carry out such research. The trickiness, however, then is shown in the second part of this webinar. Are there any questions till this point? No questions? Okay. So why research without development can earn a doctoral degree, while vice versa, this can prove to be challenging. Let's look into this. Now, are doctoral studies about research and development? I took a look at a number of programs on how they explain what doctoral studies are about. And for example, here you see the industrial doctorate is understood as a thesis developed within a company and in any area of knowledge developing an industrial research or experimental development project. Now, doctoral studies is aimed to develop qualified scientists who are capable of conducting independent scientific research and experimental development to generate new knowledge contribution to economics field, according to the 2001 classification, blah, 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 encompassing basic research, applied research, experimental development, or a combination of these. So R and D seem to be commonly part of a doctoral study. Why is development alone not sufficient, or is it? In the first example, you could see the word developing an industrial research or experimental development project. It clearly says or, right? This suggests you could do only experimental development. Now let's look further into that. Having consulted a number of guidelines, I found this one. All UK doctorates, regardless of their form, continue to require the main focus of the candidate's work to demonstrate an original contribution to knowledge in their subject field or profession through original research or the original application of existing knowledge or understanding. So indeed, it seems to be that development alone would qualify. Let's go further down that line of thought. If you go down this path, you would need to make sure that it's clear to anyone, including to yourself, how you would approach the following and to figure out the meaning. What the following would be. What typically is a thesis research project? What would it be in your case? Would it become just a thesis development project? What would be the nature of the research problem that's typical to any research taken or undertaken? Would it become a development problem? That sounds not that. Would it change altogether towards a development project? And now perhaps the most trickiest, the expectation of original investigation undertaken in order to acquire new knowledge. How would you justify that? What is it that you do that will exactly bring this about? So if you go down that lane, make sure you have answers to those questions and thoughts. Would it be through the original application of existing knowledge or understanding? That might be an option, an avenue you might want to explore. This could be, for example, the fact you had the idea that no one else had so far. Well, that obviously could happen, but it doesn't seem so likely. So if you are the case, then that might be. Your skills are so unique that no one could do it. We occasionally do see such high flyers. Are you one of those? There was no one bothering. Yes, that could be. But the question then is, why do you bother now? Or your thesis supervisor told you to do that, test something out. Yes, that could be. But then again, who is original, you or your supervisor? Or it wasn't possible for others to do it thus far. And this is a very possible case in which we will be looking now. So if this is the case, that means there were problems that could not be overcome thus far, problems that would need to be researched and fully understood. So then it's again research, and that will work over research problem, means you are back to R&D. So you see, it's very difficult to establish a case where you will only be doing D, but still comply to all of the requirements of just putting forward to you to obtain a doctorate. I'm not ruling this option out to just use do D, as some of the guides that we looked into do, but what I want you to do is to be well aware on how to justify it. Are there any questions to this point? Okay. So then, anyway, why do students have a preference for just doing development? Oh, there are quite common reasons that come all over again. For once, the development aspect is much more exciting. It's cool to do new things, right? It's tempting to explore and to just improve something. I mean, no one really likes looking at problems. This is hard and daunting. It's dark. It's hurting. That's really not fun. So there's a natural tendency to always look at the bright side of life. And we are also raised and educated like that. We are expected to focus on solutions, not to talk about problems, right? And anyway, analytics are hard. And therefore, we just do not know about how to engage with problems, be it in general, always in a research context. So there are valid reasons that we see all over again why there is a tendency and preference for development work, or also for research geared at development and at solutions. And we will look into this in the third part of this webinar. Are there any questions to this point? Okay, so let's look into the R&D from a slightly different perspective. Now, this is a research site in a very simplified way. Obviously, complexity always develops and builds in, but let's start like here. You have a problem understanding at a point in time T0, which might be the start of your doctorate, and you will conduct a problem-focused literature review. You will, at one point in time, engage with stakeholders, and your problem understanding will be evolving over time. On the opposite side sits the development. Now, if you carry out your research in a business environment, then that might be the workplace. If you'd carry out your research in a lab environment, that would be the lab. But where we see that R&D in doctoral studies often goes wrong is in the red part below, which means exactly that words such as change idea are equally false friends as the earlier shown word solution focus. And this exactly both belongs together, because what often is taking place, that the literature is consulted with a corrupted review lens and just looking at what could be developed so to solve the still not understood problem. So even where developments are literature-based, they still will go wrong because they ask questions such as, how could I do? It's not looking for understanding, but for action. Now, R&D can, however, perfectly well be aligned in doctoral level research. And in the upper part, you see the doctoral level research, and in the lower part, you see an ongoing development in your workplace. But in a lab case, that won't be much different. In a lab case, you would be belonging to a research group, and that research group has been taking out research for quite a long time, and you will be part of that and just work on a tiny research project as part of that bigger group work. And the same analogy holds valid for the business environment if you carry out your research in the workplace. And as much as research is using methods, so do development projects in organizations. So again, it's very comparable. It's not that we are looking at a very unstructured developments, but very often they are structured. They might make use deliberately of methods, such in this case, the Deming cycle, which is used by many organizations in improvement projects. Now, there are, as you see, analogies in between lab environment and work environment. So wherever you carry out your research, you might want to look more closely into such analogies, so to picture out nice and easily how research is taking place. And by doing so, you will also see that the use of terms such as change idea is really quite unfair, I would argue, because it is suggesting for you to envision a solution, which is, again, the exciting end, where I can quickly get you to become active, while in reality, you rather should be focusing on the not so exciting end, which is a problem end. So there are many false friends, be aware of those. And yes, even well-intended guides come with those false friends. They are omnipresent. So the only thing that will put you on the safe side is here to develop a critical awareness. Now, but understanding that this is not an idea, but that at the point T1, there was a wealth of knowledge in place, will help you once you engage in your research. It will help you to take stock about the existing knowledge that exists and to collect data in a very structured and pragmatic way. And where you collect the data through thorough analysis and evaluation, you conduct your studies, you collect the data from either the business environment or the lab environment, and then take them up into your research area. And this is where you process the data with a problem focus against the literature, the data in itself, or against the literature. So this also means that the research part is pretty much in the upper side, while the development part is taking down, and the development part might be isolated from your research part, at least initially, because there will always be development that is ongoing, either in a lab environment where your group is undertaking development, or within a work environment or a real environment where there will be also ongoing development. Now, the question then is, to which degree would you need to conduct original developments yourself, understanding development is ongoing? Now, this understanding is, however, critically crucial to advance with the research, which is the side on which you want to stay and focus, because this is what very likely can earn you the doctorate. Now, on the other side, the development side, where things are going on and where you collect the data from, you perhaps want to be much more critical and aware of the type of development that you want or expected to carry out yourself. And if you have set critical awareness about those both sides and how they do belong together, and at which points in time you need the lower side to collect just data, or at which point in time you need the lower side to do development, this will put your research journey at a much smoother level. And it can make a difference once it comes to the time perspective. If you compare the two ends, doing research and development will require much more prior organizational knowledge, much higher degree of problem understanding, the capability to distinguish between a solution-focused and problem-focused action. You will need high communication capabilities, so to communicate with both the research environment as well as the development environment, and we will come to that, what the difference and similarities and analogies are. And the complexity will be much tougher in an R&D context than it will be in a research context, and the likelihood of research going wrong will be much higher. And the risk of the silent death, which is unique to doctoral studies, and if you haven't come across that, please take a look at our blog, is much, much higher. Basically, you rarely see students officially failing in doctorate programs. Having said that, 75% of UK students never graduate. Now, this is a high dropout rate, and usually they drop out themselves. They just do that. They give up. So this is a sort of silent death, and you sure want to take caution that you are not on that high end. Now, doing R&D is entirely feasible, but be aware of the challenge of keeping the research focused on the problem, to not mix up both sides, and to handle the comparatively higher level of complexity that comes with an development dimension in the research project. And always try to keep the research focused on the problem and only move from there to development. Ask yourself, do you have gained this comprehensive knowledge and understanding? And so to derive a grounded change idea from there and the literature, but not because of envisioning something. If you do not, how do you make sure you're not just wasting your time, on testing random solutions, right? So there's no need on this risk. Keep your focus on the research end. Option A, let your colleagues focus on the development part. This is what we talked about earlier. If you move into the development side, there will be always ongoing developments. So you either can take your own development actions, or you understand the development actions that are anyway already going on because others are carrying those out. And then you just come in with your research at a point in time T1 and drop out at a point in time T2, and perhaps not even need to do own developments. As said, that also will be depending on what are the expectations of your faculty. So a note on the cycles, we already have seen that also in the work environment or in non-lab situations, there can be structured work that builds on methods that are comparable to what can be seen in the research work. And in this concrete example, we have at the left side the Deming PDCA cycle, and on the right side you have the action research cycle, which work out quite similar, I would argue, or they could be seen as quite similar in some views. And the beauty in this is, if you engage in your research with people from your work environment, they will not know much about constructing, planning action, taking action, evaluating action, because those are research terms not commonly seen. On the other hand, most of the business people will have come across the Deming cycle. Therefore, they already know the vocabulary. And if you, as a researcher, adopt such vocabulary, it will be much easier to communicate effectively with colleagues and other stakeholders with whom you engage. So for your personal case, check what are the analogies and make sure that you speak the same language and as much have of a shared vocabulary as possible. Now, working from research to thesis, and obviously this is point 4 and not point 3. Are there any questions thus far? Good. Now, the beauty of working with visualizations, as we have now seen, is that you can capitalize on them in a number of ways. On the one side, they will help you to illustrate your research to others. On the other side, you can use these to include them into your thesis, so to guide the reader. A third benefit is that you can use them to derive a structured path of your thesis, because those guides will provide, those illustrations will provide you with a mean to understand what is inside of your research and what is outside. Am I undertaking my research from point T1 to T2, or is it T2 to T3, or is it somewhere in between? Visualizing your work and having a clear understanding will guide you in this. And this will then allow you to derive a thesis chapter structure in accordance to that. This illustrated chapter 1 to 6 is a simplified standard thesis structure that can be expected, but even more complex structures. In my case, my thesis had, I think, 13 chapters, which is quite a bit. But working over visualization well can explain the motivation, where have data been collected, where has development been taking place, where has a second literature been coming in again, and so forth. As more as you know what you've been doing at which point in time, and have a clear visual understanding about that, as better you will be guided. Unfortunately, and the tricky thing, research is not linear. While each thesis will read relatively linear, in practice, only over time, it becomes clear how things belong together and how things do emerge. Nevertheless, the constant focus on working over such structures and to picture them out and get them written down can help you to gradually evolve on that. Having said all this, check with your faculty and supervisor on how much of the development is expected from your doctoral research project, as well as on the nature of such development. However, if you talk this through, you turn tacit things explicit. It's not the first time that I was coming across a doctoral level research handbook that is not even mentioning the word research problem. Yet it has a title Research Handbook. It doesn't have a title Development Handbook. So terminology matters, preciseness matters. This is research, not development. And therefore, please engage with your faculty so to assure that all of you are at the same side. Don't leave that unclarified, because this unclarified situation then will set you up to fail. So to potentially become one of the 75% for the UK, or 52% for the case of OECD countries that never will see the finish line. Don't put yourself at risk, no need for that. All that it takes is preciseness and required communication. Now, having said that, in closing, try also to keep complexity moderately low. While this perhaps looks like a banal visualization for the start, this is perfectly fine. The next thing would be get specific words into the problem-focused literature review. What is it exactly that you talk about? What is the exact understanding? So give things names, and therefore start building up your research visualization. And get clarity about the basics. What more than the above illustration do I need to consider? How do I want my research to be? What are the expectations of my faculty, of my supervisor, and potentially further stakeholders? What are my boundaries, and what belongs together, and how does it belong together? And what will be the role of development within my thesis research work? Now, if you want to have some further training on this, we have, for those that are already a bit more advanced, a writing up and structuring your thesis course, which comes in 3 formats: free self-study, fully tutored, or flexible on-demand feedback. Take a look at it. For those that are still at an earlier stage, we do also have some training opportunities on problematizing, research question framing. So take a look then perhaps rather at those courses. With this, we will stop the recording before we move into the group activity. And before handing over